we're sitting down with one of the most controversial figures in the U.S. politics. He was assistant to Secretary of Defense under President Reagan. He was chairman of the Defense Policy Board under George W. Bush, a man who is seen by many as one of the chief architects of the war in Iraq. Richard Perle. Mr. Perle, thank you very much for joining us. What do you think Washington's plans are with regards to Iran? Could we see another case for war being built against Iran?
Well, the United States now is hoping that Iran will see the light and abandon its nuclear weapons program. But whether, in the end, we or someone else decides that force is necessary to stop the nuclear weapons program, I can't say. I think we are, at the moment, pursuing diplomatic means, economic sanctions, and the government hopes that that will succeed. I'm rather doubtful that that will succeed.
You're speculating on intentions as it happened in Iraq. I mean, the International Atomic Energy Agency report said that Iran might have the technology to build an atomic weapon if it wants to, but it's a long way to actually accusing a country of building a nuclear weapon, isn't it?
Well, I'm willing to accuse Iran of building nuclear weapons. I don't think there's any question about it. They're building missiles that only make sense if they carry nuclear warheads. They are paying an enormous cost internationally by insisting on enriching nuclear material, which will give them the opportunity to produce weapons-grade material for atomic bombs or hydrogen bombs. We now have from the IAEA a detailed account from a scientist who was involved in that program, and it leaves no question as to what they're doing. I don't know why anyone has any doubts about what they're doing.
Well, the thing is, the war in Iraq has pretty much undermined the credibility of the U.S. when it comes to starting wars and justifying wars. And you were one of the chief architects of the Iraq War. And the allegation that many are making is that you, including by members of the Bush administration, is that you were looking for any kind of intelligence to justify an invasion.
No, it's not true. We were looking for intelligence that would shed some light on some important questions, like does Saddam have weapons of mass destruction? Is he in contact with terrorists? What are the risks involved in leaving him in place after 9/11, when we discovered that we could be terribly vulnerable? But the belief that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction was not based on any one intelligence informant. It was mostly based on the fact that we knew a lot about things that Saddam had acquired. For example, the chemicals that you would need to put together.
But again, it's the same with Iran. You're making assumptions of that they have the material, they have the technology, and therefore they have the weapon.
Well, what are you suggesting? That we stop trying to figure out whether Iran has nuclear weapons because there were intelligence errors with respect to Iraq?
There
Should
were
the United
errors.
States dismantle its intelligence organizations? And of course not. There were mistakes.
Do you acknowledge that the case for war in Iraq in 2003 was a mistake?
No, what I acknowledge is that some of the ideas that lay behind it, particularly the idea that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, were wrong. He didn't have weapons of mass destruction, and we believed he did. But the argument for removing Saddam did not depend on the specifics of whether he had weapons of mass destruction or not. It was an element, but it wasn't the whole story by any means, because he'd had weapons of mass destruction in the past, and there was no reason to believe he couldn't get them again in the future. He just didn't have them at the moment that the CIA believed he did.
Could never understand if the administration really believed that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, they wouldn't have attacked Iraq. I mean, what if the guy pushed the button, right? It's simple logic that suggests that the administration knew that he had nothing. That's why they went for it.
It's just not true, and it's not logical either.
Wouldn't he be too dangerous to attack if he actually had? I mean,
well, we believed that he had chemical and biological weapons. And we took enormous precautions to deal with that so that every American who went into Iraq was equipped to deal with a chemical weapons attack, which we expected to happen. And it didn't happen.
Why doesn't anybody attack North Korea? I mean, they have a bomb. Why doesn't anybody attack North Korea?
Well,
because everybody knows they have the bombs, right?
Right. Well, we don't attack everyone who has a nuclear weapon. That's clear. I think there's a pretty good case for trying to change the regime in North Korea. I don't think you could do that by bombing North Korea. But if what you're suggesting is that once a country has a nuclear weapon, no one will attack it out of a fear that it will use its nuclear weapon, there's an element of truth in that. But in the case of North Korea, the situation between North and South Korea is such that even if North Korea didn't have a nuclear weapon, they have an ability to inflict terrible damage on the capital of South Korea because they have thousands of artillery pieces within range of Seoul. And that is a very powerful deterrent against taking action.
Do you still believe it was the right decision to go to invade Iraq?
I think the decision was based on what we knew at the time, and based on what we knew at the time, it was the right decision. I don't believe it was carried out very effectively, and that's the tragedy. Instead of turning things over to the Iraqis, more or less immediately, we got involved in an occupation, and occupations are never popular. And the fact that we were an occupying power, recognized as such by the United Nations, by the way, was very important in the development of the insurgency against the occupation. I think it would have been a different situation.
The U.S. went from, it was weapons of mass destruction, ties with terrorism, and then it became all about democracy. The idea that the U.S. has to enforce democracy wherever it can, I believe that that's the idea that you share.
No, it's not.
But you were earlier saying that we should encourage in any possible way.
Not by military means.
Not like in Iraq.
No, we went into Iraq not to establish a democracy. We went into Iraq because the administration believed that Saddam Hussein's Iraq was a threat to the United States.
And why didn't the U.S. just get out of Iraq as soon as they found out that there is nothing there?
That's what they should have done. Yeah, you have to ask George Bush why he didn't do that.
Do you think Iraq's vast oil reserves had nothing to do with the decision to go to Iraq?
I don't believe that we went into Iraq because Iraq has oil, if that's the question. Iraq has oil, to be sure, and if we need oil from Iraq, we'll buy it. We don't seize other people's oil fields and send the oil back to the United States. We buy oil. We import roughly half of our oil.
So what you're saying, you couldn't afford having Saddam Hussein getting rich and powerful considering he hated America?
It wasn't just rich and powerful. It's a question of what behavior one could anticipate. And he had invaded Kuwait, as we know. He had invaded Iran, as we know. Nobody knew what he was going to do next.
There has been a number of surveys that show that America has never been as hated in the Muslim world as it is now. Where is this coming from, and how should the U.S. address this?
Well, I don't know what we can do effectively to counter that. I mean, we're not alone in that. The United Kingdom is hated in the Muslim world. Russia is hated in the Muslim world.
You're saying Russia is hated in the Muslim world as much as the U.S. is?
Well, I don't know who's hated more. I know that a lot of the people who would wish to inflict injury on the United States would also wish to inflict injury on Russia, as we've seen with some acts of violence in Russia. If we are hated, and part of the explanation for that is that we are resisting their messianic belief in the superiority of Islam, That's just too bad.
Don't you think the U.S. also has a messianic belief of its superiority over other countries?
I wouldn't use the word messianic.
But superiority.
We're proud of what we've accomplished. If your self-defense makes people angry or makes you hated, are you right to defend yourself? I have to say we are right to defend ourselves, even if one of the consequences will sometimes...
Is more terror?
Even if some people decide to become terrorists because they don't like the fact that we've defended ourselves. What's the alternative?
That seems to be a vicious circle.
Well, it's not a pleasant thing. What do? Not defend yourself? And say, well, if I defend myself, they're going to be...
Not against the country that never attacked the U.S.? I mean Iraq. Defending yourself against a presumption of a potential attack. That's what we're talking about. It wasn't an immediate danger that the U.S. was confronting in Iraq. I was watching a documentary about you when I was getting ready for this interview, and I remember this mother of an American soldier who died in Iraq, and she was crying and shouting at you, "You are a man of mass destruction." How do you deal with situations like that? You must have come across things like that pretty often in the past.
Well, it's very unpleasant. What can you do? I understand a mother's grief. So, I mean, I'm not angry about it. I understand it. But it's unpleasant.
Thank you for the interview, sir.
You're welcome.